The train tracks stretched endlessly across the golden autumn fields, their steel veins cutting through a world that seemed both vast and unwelcoming. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and dust, heavy with the weight of broken promises and unfinished journeys. At the small station, weathered by time and silence, a young woman sat on a worn wooden bench. Her bare feet pressed lightly against the cool planks, the chill of the wood seeping into her skin as her trembling hands clutched a crumpled letter, the very letter that had carried her across hundreds of miles. Loose waves of hair framed her weary face, while her wide eyes, once full of hope, were now shadowed with despair. She had come here not as a traveler of leisure but as a mail-order bride, summoned with promises of a future, only to be abandoned in the cruelest way. Around her, every passenger who stepped off the train was greeted with warmth, eager smiles, strong embraces, hopeful reunions. And yet she remained alone, her heart breaking a little more with each joyful cry that did not belong to her. She began to feel like something unwanted, discarded like a forgotten parcel left behind in the station's dust. Her name was Clara, and her life had never been easy. She had grown up in a world where poverty suffocated every dream before it could bloom, where survival itself was the only measure of success, and where women often had no choice but to place their fate into the hands of strangers. When Clara had answered the advertisement, she had done so not with visions of romance but with a desperate desire for stability. The letter promised her a home, the security of marriage, and the chance to build something steady in the wild and unforgiving western frontier. With little else to hold on to, Clara sold the only shoes she owned to buy her ticket, sewed her few belongings into a small sack, and set out across states with the fragile belief that someone was waiting at the other end. She imagined a man standing at the station with her name in his heart, a future in his eyes. But when the train arrived, no one stepped forward. She waited. Hours passed as her hope withered, and with every tick of the station clock, she felt herself unraveling. Tears welled in her eyes as the realization cut deep. She had been deceived, forgotten, or perhaps discarded before she ever arrived. It was in the quietest, most fragile moment of her despair that she felt a small tug at her skirt. Clara looked down to see a child, no more than 5 years old, gazing up at her with wide, searching eyes. The little girl's golden hair was braided loosely, strands falling free to catch the light of the fading sun. In her tiny hand she clutched a patched and worn teddy bear, it seems fraying but loved nonetheless. There was no judgment in her eyes, no hesitation, only a longing that pierced through Clara's sorrow with astonishing force. The child's soft, trembling voice broke the silence with words that would alter the course of Clara's life forever. "Will you be my mommy?" Clara's breath caught in her chest, for in those innocent eyes she saw a reflection of her own emptiness, the same loneliness that had haunted her for as long as she could remember. She would soon learn that the little girl's story was etched with tragedy no child should bear. Her father had died in a sudden accident, leaving her mother to fight against the merciless winter alone. But grief and hardship had proven too heavy, and her mother had withered away not long after, leaving the girl orphaned in a world that showed little mercy. Since then, she had been living with distant relatives who did not see her as a child to love, but as a burden to endure. The weight of abandonment hung in her every word, in her every hesitant gesture, and Clara felt it as though it were her own. In Clara, the little girl saw something no one else could, something she had been searching for all along. It was not wealth, nor security, nor even certainty. What she saw was the possibility of family, of warmth, of belonging. Clara felt her heart clench at the child's plea. Every instinct within her wanted to say yes immediately, to gather the girl into her arms and never let go. But she knew the world was not that kind, not that simple. She herself was penniless, homeless, and a stranger in a town that had no place for her. Even so, the words tugged at her soul, awakening an ache she had not known she carried, the ache of wanting to matter, to be needed, to love, and to be loved in return. With trembling hands, Clara wiped away her tears and reached for the child, clasping her tiny fingers in her own. Her voice broke as she whispered that she would not leave her, not now, not ever. The townspeople watched from a distance, their gazes filled with pity, suspicion, or quiet judgment. In that small frontier town, strangers were rarely welcomed, and a woman without a husband or protector was viewed as an outcast. Whispers followed Clara wherever she walked, whispers that stung as sharply as the autumn wind. Yet she kept her chin lifted, for the child beside her had nowhere else to go, and Clara could not bear to abandon the one soul who had chosen her. Work was scarce, and what she was offered paid almost nothing. She scrubbed laundry until her fingers bled, swept the floors of taverns where men muttered about her presence, and helped at the bakery in exchange for bread crusts rather than coins. The little money she earned was barely enough to keep hunger at bay. At night, she and the child often sought shelter wherever they could find it, in the shadows of barns, in sheds no longer used, or beneath the wide canopy of stars. Clara would hold the little girl close against her chest, her arms wrapped tightly around her small body, sharing what little warmth she had. Hunger gnawed at her constantly, and exhaustion threatened to break her spirit. Yet through it all, she clung to her promise. She would not let go. There were moments when despair nearly consumed her. After the child had drifted to sleep, Clara would sit awake in the darkness, staring at the horizon with hollow eyes. Doubt whispered that she had made a mistake, that she should have left on the next train and disappeared into a place where no one knew her name. Perhaps there, she might have found the life she had once dreamed of. But each morning, when the first light of dawn brushed across the fields and the little girl's hand reached for hers, Clara felt strength pour back into her bones. Those wide, trusting eyes made her believe again, even when the world told her not to. For the first time in her life, Clara was no longer invisible. Someone needed her, someone loved her, and in that truth she discovered a courage greater than hunger, greater than loneliness, greater than fear itself. She was someone's hope, someone's safety, someone's mother in all but name. What Clara did not realize was that her quiet strength and unyielding kindness had not gone unseen. Among the townsfolk was a local rancher, a reserved man named James, who had spent years carrying the weight of his own losses. A widower who had known grief as intimately as breath, James recognized in Clara a spirit that had been shaped not by ease or privilege, but by hardship and survival. From a distance, he had watched the way she shielded the little girl from the biting cold, how she accepted backbreaking work for a handful of pennies, how she bore the weight of whispers and judgment without a word of retaliation, and how she somehow managed to smile at the child even when her own heart seemed on the verge of breaking. Something about her perseverance, her quiet grace, stirred a part of him that he thought had long been buried. At first, James's gestures were small, almost imperceptible. A bundle of firewood left near the barn where she slept. A basket of food offered with no expectation in return. Occasional work on his ranch that paid more than what others in town would give her. Clara, still carrying the sting of her abandonment, remained cautious. She had no reason to trust men, and her bruised heart resisted his kindness. Yet James never pressed her, never demanded, never rushed. His steady patience and quiet consistency slowly began to wear down the walls she had so carefully built around herself. Bit by bit, she allowed him closer, not for her sake at first, but for the child who now depended on her completely. Through storms, hunger, and the endless grind of survival, Clara and the little girl became inseparable. Their bond deepened with each passing day, no longer a fragile thread of circumstance, but a tie woven strong with love and care. Clara brushed the child's hair with gentle fingers, mended her clothes with careful stitches, and told her stories by lantern light to chase away the night's fears. She kissed her forehead when tears fell and held her close until the sobs subsided. And the child, who had once moved through the world with slumped shoulders and tear-streaked cheeks, began to blossom. She laughed freely again, her voice carrying across fields as she ran barefoot through the grass, her patched teddy bear bouncing at her side. She began to trust in the simple joy of love, and in doing so, Clara too rediscovered what it meant to belong. Once discarded, Clara now found herself at the very center of someone's world. The true turning point came one crisp autumn evening when the town gathered for the annual harvest festival. Lanterns glowed along the square, casting golden light on the laughter and music that filled the air. Clara, dressed in her plain brown dress, sat quietly at the edge of the gathering, her hand clasped tightly around the child's small fingers. She felt out of place, as though joy were something reserved for others, never for her. But then James approached, his smile warm and unassuming, his hand extended in a simple invitation. At first, Clara hesitated, but the child tugged eagerly at her, eyes alight with hope. With a deep breath, Clara allowed herself to stand, to take James's hand, and together the three of them stepped into the circle of light. The townspeople watched in silence as James, Clara, and the little girl began to dance beneath the lanterns. The music carried them, their laughter weaving through the night like a thread of belonging. And something remarkable happened. Judgment softened into quiet acceptance, suspicion gave way to respect, and the whispers that once followed Clara turned into warm smiles. For in that moment, they no longer saw her as a discarded mail-order bride, cast aside and forgotten. They saw her as she truly was, a woman of resilience and unshakable love, one who had breathed life back into a grieving child and, in doing so, had begun to heal her own wounds.